Hey, what's up, New Life? Coach Conder here, talking about how to understand the Bible. So far, we've had 2 videos on this. The first was talking about the structure, understanding the big picture, the Old Testament, New Testament books, types of books within each of those. The last session that we talked about the geography of the Old Testament and understanding the bodies of water and the locations, and how if we understand those 2 things, whenever we come across a place, we can connect it and see how it relates to other things and catch the significance of things. So again, this is all in this book by Max Anders, 30 Days to Understanding the Bible. Incredible resource. Get one of these. It's going to be a blessing to you. So today, in this video, we're talking about the 9 main eras of the Old Testament. And here's what I'm going to attempt to do. I'm going to attempt to go through the 9 eras, which stop here. We're not going to get into the New Testament eras yet. And I'm going to tell you the name of the era, the main figure that relates to that period of time, and then the location on the map that we talked about last time of where the storyline is taking place. All right, so here we go. So era number 1 is creation. This is in the beginning, God speaks. He creates the earth. He creates man and woman. And this also includes some of the early events like the flood and Tower of Babel. So this is creation. The main figure for this era is Adam, the first man. And the location, where does this take place on the map? That's right, we talked about it last time. Somewhere here. This is where we believe the Garden of Eden was roughly located. So creation, Adam, Eden. The next era is going to be the Patriarch. So this era is a 200-year time frame, and there's multiple patriarchs or male heads of families or this group of people. And the main figure within this era is Abraham. He was the first patriarch, and the location where the story now shifts to is this piece of land that God gives Abraham, promises to give his descendants, which is Canaan. So if creation and Adam starts here in Eden, the story now shifts with the call of Abraham. He ends up in Canaan. So now the story is here. Creation, Patriarch. The third era of the Old Testament is Exodus. So Exodus, somebody's leaving or exiting from one place to another. This is a period of time where, fast forward in the story, Adam's here, Abram's called. Well, he has some descendants. Joseph ends up here, which is the location of this next era, which is Egypt. Eventually, the Hebrew people that Abraham was the father of, they are enslaved in Egypt. So they're slaves there, and so this is where the next figure picks up in the story. In the Exodus era, it's Moses, right? Because he's going to lead the Hebrew people out of slavery in Egypt to a land that God has promised to freedom. So now, the storyline during the Exodus era is here in Egypt. All right, so that's 3 eras down, 6 more to go in the Old Testament. The next era is Conquest. So after Moses has led the people through the Red Sea, they get right up to the edge of the Promised Land. They have to wander in the wilderness because they sent the spies out, didn't give a good report. The people didn't have faith, didn't trust God. And so God said, I'm going to make you wander in the wilderness. This generation's going to die off, and it's going to be the next generation that will enter into the land. And so the figure for this era of conquest is Joshua. This is the main figure. He replaces Moses and leads the Hebrew people into the land and conquers the people who lived in the land at that time. And so they're now back in Canaan. So a lot's happening in this area, right? So we're back here in in Canaan. I should have written this too. Okay. Creation, Patriarch, Exodus, Conquest. Now, the next era is Judges. So we're still in the same land of Canaan right here. And what ends up happening is they take the land, but the Hebrew people, they go into this time period where everyone just wants to do what's right in their own eyes, and it's a time of sin and rebellion. But during this time, God raised up some tribal leaders that were called judges. So don't think of like a law court judge, but just a political leader of a tribe, right? So there's this downward spiral of sin, the cyclical sinfulness that the Hebrew people experience. And the main figure during this time period, the period of the Judges, is Samson. So Samson was one of the judges. And again, the story is taking place in Canaan. All right, so think through this with me. Creation, Adam, Eden. Patriarch, Abraham, Canaan. Exodus, Moses, Egypt. Conquest, Joshua, Canaan. Judges, Samson, Canaan. All right, so now we're moving into the next era of the Old Testament, and this is kingdom. Kingdom. So Israel, the Hebrew people, they're complaining. They say, God, we want a king like all the other nations. Give us a king, please. And so God finally turns them over to having a king. They didn't want God to be their king. He said, I'll give you a king. So he raises up a couple of kings. The first one wasn't any good. The main figure of this kingdom era, or the era in which these 12 tribes unified as one and now became a monarchy, the main person is David. It's King David. And now, this area of land is going to be referred to as Israel. So King David, there's one united kingdom of all 12 tribes. Things are going good, right? Well, not so much. Because the next era is exile. The next era is exile. So what ends up happening is there's basically a civil war between the United Kingdom. There's a split. 10 of the tribes go to the north and make Israel. 2 of the tribes go to the south and make Judah, because Judah's the bigger of the two. And what ends up happening is, because of the sins of the people are turned from God. God lets some foreign powers come in and pull them out of the land and scatter them all over. So the first people to do that was Assyria, that we talked about last time. Assyria came in, conquers Israel, scatters them. But the next group of people that come are from Babylonia. The Babylonians come, they conquer Assyria, and then they conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. And so for 70 years, God's people are in Babylon, these leaders of Israel, some of their best people. And so for the exile period, the key figure is Daniel. And this period, this era, takes place in Babylonia. All right, so now God's people have been exiled, conquered, they're in Babylonia, many of them. And eventually what's going to happen is that Persia is going to conquer Babylonia and Assyria, and Persia is actually going to allow the Hebrew people, the Israelites, to go back and return to their land and set up the temple, worship God, build back their city of Jerusalem. So now we're into the next era, what I just described, which is the return. And one of the key leaders in the return to help get God's people back to God's Word and to worship and community was Ezra. and God's people come back to the city of Jerusalem. Okay, so that's 8 of the eras. Now we're on to the 9th and final era of the Old Testament. There's now this period of silence. So there's 400 years between Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament being written, and the first writings of the New Testament being written. So there's 400 years of silence in between the two testaments. And this period or era of silence, the main figure or figures are the Pharisees. And the setting is still primarily in Jerusalem. All right, so let's say this all together. Just lock it into your mind. Repetition is going to help us remember this. So the first era is creation, Adam, Eden. Patriarch, Abraham, Canaan. Exodus, Moses, Egypt. Conquest, Joshua, Canaan. Judges, Samson, Canaan. Kingdom, David, Israel. Exile, Daniel, Babylonia. Return, Ezra, Jerusalem. And silence, Pharisees, Jerusalem. So those are the 9 eras of the Old Testament. The name of the era, the key figure, and the location. Really hope this is helpful. We'll see you in the next video.